The earth burned where he rode. Villages vanished into smoke. Cities fell silent. And behind the thunder of hooves came the screams. Sharp, short, and then gone. Genghis Khan, the Khan of the eternal blue sky, swept across the world like a storm without mercy. His name meant universal ruler, but to many it meant the end. They say the men died quickly. Spears through the chest, throats cut in rows, old men buried alive in the rubble of their homes. Sons lined up at the edges of conquered cities, their blood soaking the sand. But the women, they were spared. Not out of kindness, not out of mercy, but because they were beautiful, because they were symbols, because they could be used. This is not the tale of a great warrior. This is the untold story of the women left behind by fire who were not allowed to die. Centuries have passed, and yet the myth of Genghis Khan continues to shimmer like a blade in the dark. He is remembered as a military genius, a unifier of tribes, a lawgiver who ruled with brutal justice. Historians praise his code of yasa, his tolerance for religions, his meritocratic army. But under the skin of legend lies another truth, one rarely spoken. The story of women during Genghis Khan's reign is not one of tolerance. It is one of silence, of forced survival, of being carried like spoils from the ashes of their homes. Across Persia, Central Asia, and the Khwarezmian Empire, a pattern repeated itself. When a city fell, the women were separated. The young, the noble, the fair-skinned were selected and taken. Many were given to warriors as prizes, rewards for loyalty and violence. The rest were marched east in chains, not to prisons, but to harems. To be chosen was to live, but it was also to disappear. In the capital of Karakorum, Genghis Khan's growing empire was filled with silence. His harem was said to contain thousands of women, Persian princesses, Chinese courtesans, Turkish noblewomen, Slavic captives, all stripped of names, of identity, of history. No records speak of their dreams. No chronicles quote their pain. Even their survival was a kind of death. They were dressed in silk, fed well, taught to sing, play instruments, pour wine with grace. But their beauty was not theirs to own. It was a possession, like gold or land or horses. And it was used to demonstrate a brutal truth, that even the queens of fallen kingdoms could become decorations in the house of the conqueror. We often speak of Genghis Khan's justice, that he spared warriors who surrendered, that he rewarded loyalty, that he believed in order above chaos. But this justice did not apply to women. They were conquered twice, once as citizens of their doomed cities, and again as bodies. In some cases, they were taken to bear children. In others, simply to entertain. And those who resisted? The record falls quiet, but we know what happens when men are not merciful and women are powerless. Sometimes death was faster. There is a strange praise in the old texts, that Genghis Khan respected beautiful captives, that he protected them from insult, that he fed them and kept them clean. But what is respect in a world where your freedom is stripped with your name? What is protection if it means you belong to a man who burned your city to the ground? This story is not about one woman. It is about thousands, faceless, voiceless, nameless. It is about the women who lived because they were beautiful and died inside because they were not allowed to be anything else. The steppe still whispers their names, but we've forgotten how to hear them. It began with smoke on the horizon, a caravan of horsemen, the trembling of the earth. Then the gates fell and the world collapsed. Behind the crackling of fire came the silence of fear. City after city, Samarkand, Bukhara, Urgench, Nishapur, each one erased, its men slaughtered, its women gathered. Not rescued, not liberated, just separated. The older women were dismissed, sometimes allowed to flee into the wilderness, sometimes killed quietly behind the walls. But the young and beautiful were taken as gifts, taken as property, taken as trophies. After the fall of Nishapur, it said that tens of thousands were executed. Men, boys, even animals. But the women, the Mongols kept them, and Genghis Khan chose. For the warriors of the steppe, taking women was not just about lust. It was ritual, a demonstration of dominance. If you conquered a people, you deserved their daughters. If you fought bravely, you earned the right to enjoy their princesses. And if you served the great Khan, he would reward you with beauty bound in silence. Women were currency in an empire soaked in blood. Noble women were especially valuable. A Persian empress, a Turkic Khatun, a Khwarezmian queen, to strip them of their crown and veil and place them in the tent of a warrior, was to erase not just their identity, but the entire world they came from. And what made it worse, they lived. Genghis Khan's harem became a graveyard for queens. The capital of Karakorum filled with women who once ruled courts, who once walked with maids behind them, who once had names carved into marble. Now they sat in silence, taught to sing for their captor, smile at feasts, and bear sons who would never know where they came from. Some were passed from hand to hand, like fine horses. Others were given as diplomatic gifts, tokens of goodwill to generals and sons. And for those deemed especially beautiful, they were added to the Khan's private harem, where their bodies became part of his legacy. He had 4 official wives, but according to Persian and Chinese chroniclers, Genghis Khan possessed over 7,000 concubines. Not one of them left behind her voice. But what is a voice in a world built to silence you? Some tried to escape. Others took their own lives. There are scattered records of women throwing themselves into rivers, burning themselves alive in their palaces, or simply walking into the fire as their homes collapsed, choosing death over dishonor. But most did not get to choose. For the women of conquered cities, beauty became a sentence. Pale skin, golden hair, almond eyes, all became markers of vulnerability. European women, especially Slavs and fair Persians, were highly prized. To be beautiful was not to be cherished. It was to be hunted, packaged, and gifted. And in that strange world, some learned to survive. There were women who rose, not by choice but by adaptation. They bore children for the generals. They learned the songs of the Mongol steppe. They smiled with dead eyes. One such woman was Turgen Khatun, a captive who became the wife of Genghis Khan's son, Ogadai. When he died, she ruled the empire for 4 years, a rare moment where a woman of the harem wielded true power. But even she was surrounded by rivals, watched closely, and ultimately erased from many chronicles written by men. Her story was not one of glory, it was one of survival. The Mongols believed that taking a woman was not just a pleasure, it was a sacred right of victory. A defeated enemy's women became the proof of his failure and the reward of the conqueror. One chilling quote attributed to Genghis Khan himself reveals the heart of this belief. The greatest joy a man can know is to conquer his enemies, to drive them before him, to take their horses and possessions, and to embrace their wives and daughters. For the women, this meant that survival itself was a performance. You had to seem grateful, or silent, or invisible. Anything but angry. Not every captive was kept. Those who were not beautiful enough, or too exhausted to be of use, were abandoned in the steppe. Some were traded like cattle for supplies. Others were left tied to trees. There are stories of women found half alive in the wilderness, crawling with no shoes, their hands still bound. Some too weak to walk were simply forgotten. Even those who entered the harem were not necessarily safe. If a concubine displeased the Khan, or worse, was suspected of infidelity, she could be executed, not because she posed a threat, but because she had been claimed and was now considered property. To violate her body was to challenge the Khan's ownership, and that was punishable by death. Genghis Khan ruled through power, yes, through military genius, through law and discipline. But in the shadows of that empire, he ruled through fear, not just of death, but of life in captivity. The story we are told is one of glory, but the women tell another story, one that was never written down, one that lived only in screams and songs and silence. Their fate was not to be killed. Their fate was to be kept. They did not scream, at least not out loud. Not in Karakorum. The capital of the Mongol Empire was no longer a battlefield. It was clean, silent, orderly. Here the Khan did not ride with blood on his hands. He sat on fur-lined thrones, sipping fermented mare's milk from gold cups. Around him moved the spoils of empire. Dancers, scribes, translators, servants, and women. So many women. Some had once been queens. Others were barely old enough to know what they had lost. All had been chosen. All had been spared. And yet none of them were free. Inside the harem, the rules were unspoken. You were to smile, but not too brightly. You were to obey, but never presume. You were to stay beautiful, even if your soul had gone numb. There were lessons. Music. Perfume. Fabric. Grace. A woman must float like silk. Her silence must be soft. Her presence must be pleasing, always, even if she bled, even if she broke, even if her name had already been lost to the fire. Because in Genghis Khan's world, a woman's body could survive. Long after her spirit had died. We speak of his greatness, but she, the girl from Nishapur, the princess of Khwarazm, the daughter of the Bukhara governor, she was not counted among his victories, only among his belongings. Some tried to adapt, to learn the Mongol tongue, to sing their sorrow through instruments. Others stopped speaking altogether. There is no record of their memories because no one asked. The scribes of Karakorum wrote the names of battles and treaties, not lullabies whispered by captive mothers. They recorded the number of concubines, not the number of dreams broken. Some women incredibly rose. Turagan Khatun, once a captive, became the regent of the Mongol Empire after her husband Ogeday's death. For 4 years she ruled in his name, commanding armies, shaping alliances, issuing orders from behind a curtain. She was not a puppet. She was brilliant, calculating, a survivor who learned to bend the rules of a world built to silence her. But even she was never forgiven for her ambition. After her death, chroniclers buried her legacy under suspicion. Whispers of poison, manipulation, arrogance, as if a woman with power must have cheated to gain it. History only praises female captives when they stay quiet. In rare moments, we see a flicker of resistance. A Chinese general once wrote of attending a feast with Genghis Khan. There, seated among warriors and nobles, were 8 concubines, veiled, delicate, pale-skinned, women from the far west. One of them dared to speak. She asked the general where he was from, what his home was like, whether the sea was truly blue. She asked softly, but the room fell silent. A concubine was not meant to speak to men outside the Khan's circle. She had broken a rule without knowing it, or perhaps she had known, and simply no longer cared. The general didn't record her name. He only wrote that her eyes were empty. Even the great Khan had boundaries. Or so it seemed. One day, a close associate named Ni sent a woman, Kulan, famed for her beauty, to meet Genghis Khan. She was of noble blood, a descendant of the Merkits. But on the journey, fearing the unruly warriors, Ni sheltered her in his home for 3 days. When the Khan found out, he flew into a rage. For him, this was not about lust. It was about ownership. A woman promised to the Khan who spent a single night under another man's roof had been defiled, even if untouched, even if protected, even if innocent. Kulan, standing before the furious emperor, begged for mercy, not for herself, but for the man who had defended her. She reminded Genghis of Ni's lineage, his loyalty, his intention. She asked for a proper investigation. For one breathless moment, she spoke like a queen again, and Genghis Khan, surprisingly, spared them both. But this moment of grace only sharpens the cruelty of the rest, because mercy, for most women, never came. There were women who survived by forgetting who they were, and there were women who didn't survive at all. After the celebrations, after the laughter, after the drums stopped and the night fell, the women gifted to common warriors faced their fate in tents on the outskirts of camp. No servants, no silks, no food, only fear. When the warriors grew tired of them, they were discarded, sometimes traded for wine, sometimes tied to trees and left behind, sometimes simply killed. Some tried to escape, some were hunted down, some killed themselves. No names, no graves, only the echo of their disappearance. And yet for all this suffering, some chroniclers still praised Genghis Khan for his treatment of women, that he protected them from insult, that he honored beauty, that he fed and clothed his concubines. But what is honor without choice? What is protection that comes only after conquest? They did not scream. They could not. Because if you scream in a world where no one listens, you become the wind. And on the Mongol steppe, the wind never stops. Long after the swords were sheathed and the bones were buried, the Mongol Empire still stood, stretched across deserts, mountains, rivers, a marvel of conquest, a riddle of governance, a tale of genius, brutality, and transformation. And yet not a single monument bore their names. Not the women of Samarkand, not the girls from Bukhara, not the mothers from Nishapur, not the children torn from temples, palaces, courtyards. They were remembered, if at all, as spoils, as footnotes, as part of the Khan's legacy, not their own. The chroniclers of empire called Genghis Khan a visionary, a man ahead of his time, A leader who promoted merit over blood, diplomacy over vengeance, law over chaos, but not for women. For them, there were no reforms. No Yasa law protected their dignity. Only obedience, silence, and survival. In the empire of Genghis Khan, a woman's value began with her beauty and ended with her usefulness. And still, some whispered that they were lucky. Lucky not to be slaughtered like the rest. Lucky to be spared, clothed, fed, and touched by power. But this is the oldest lie empire tells. That captivity is mercy. That submission is safety. That a gilded cage is better than no cage at all. And yet behind the palace curtains, in the echoing hush of painted halls, women wept the same way they had in burning villages. Only now more quietly. They wore jewels on their wrists, but no one asked them who they used to be. The Mongol Empire collapsed eventually. Its successors, the Yuan in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, inherited both its brilliance and its brutality. But the cycle had been set. Across centuries, new empires would follow the same pattern. Conquer, divide, take the women. The Romans, the Ottomans, the Mughals, the colonizers of every age. Because power, when it is unchecked, always finds a way to rewrite cruelty as culture. And history, when it is written by men, always finds a way to erase women without ever having to kill them. So what became of them? The girls forced to dance before blood-drenched tents. The noble women handed from one general to another. The daughters who never saw their mothers again. We don't know. We don't know, because we never asked. We only counted empires by the men who ruled them, not by the women who survived them. And perhaps that is the most enduring conquest of Genghis Khan. Not the cities, not the trade routes, not the walls broken and maps redrawn, but the silence. The silence that outlived every scream. The silence that echoes even now. Today we speak of him with fascination. As a genius, a founder, a force of nature. The man who changed the world. But if we do not also speak of what he did to women, we are not telling history. We are telling a myth. The truth is harder. That some empires were built on strategy, others on innovation. But this one was built on bodies. And while Genghis Khan's name remains carved in stone, the names of his victims are carved in air. Somewhere beneath the dust of the steppes, beneath layers of myth and glory, beneath the roar of horses and the hush of history books, lie the unmarked graves of forgotten girls. They were not warriors. They were not queens. They were not remembered. But they were real. And if we listen closely, past the pride, past the poetry, past the propaganda, we might still hear their voices. Faint, broken, but still here. Whispering, we were there too.